Hello everybody, welcome to this edition of the Coaching Conversation. In this series, we're looking to help business owners, business leaders see how coaching can help them and their teams be the people they want to be, achieve the things they really want to achieve in their life. We also aim it at fellow coaches. What we're really looking to do is to show them our experiences and hope that that inspires them and helps them develop their own skills and practices. I'm Graham Wiley. I've been coaching business leaders and business owners around the world for the last 2 decades. Nothing more to say now other than get ready, get comfortable. Here comes this edition of the Coaching Conversation. Hello everybody and welcome to this edition of the Coaching Conversation. And this week we're going to revisit a topic we've talked about before, but this time with a fabulous guest. So the subject this week is going to be Impostor Syndrome. I'm going to be joined by Joel Edward Love Jr., who is coming all the way from Guadalajara in Mexico. And he has a business based in Oakland, California, and is a psychotherapist, a public speaker, an author, and an executive coach. Joel, welcome to the Coaching Conversation. Please tell us a bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. Looking forward to this conversation. So a bit about myself. I'm originally, as was shared, related to, I'm from Oakland, California, and that's where my business is today. And I'm biracial. So my father is African-American, mother Scottish Canadian, and they met in the San Francisco Bay Area and had me and my twin sister. And I grew up alongside my father, really under his wing. He's a businessman, entrepreneur, and he would have nightclubs that he would operate. And so working with him from a very young age, I mean, 6, 7, 8 years old, I started to learn about money and marketing, operations, some HR. I mean, it was a smaller business operation. And all of his businesses were in the Black community. They were specifically for Black clients or club goers, if you will. And there's always an element of Black community uplift involved philosophically in his businesses. So that just became very normalized for me as a kid. And I always knew that I'd have a business likely in the Black community when I grew up. I just didn't know what. So in my 20s, even though I was born and raised in a Buddhist community, both from my mom and my dad, I had friends that were of different religious backgrounds and noticed that they seemed to be pretty happy. They didn't need to practice the Buddhism that we practiced in order to really be happy in life. So I actually left my Buddhist roots behind and started studying different religions from around the world, forms of spirituality as well. And ultimately, I stumbled on psychotherapy. And psychotherapy was so powerful for me because I wasn't in this context being asked or urged, or it wasn't even part of the belief system, if you will, to believe in an external power or force or deity, and to mirror my life in some ways or many ways after that deity. And, for us, we could just go back to Buddha and the different practices that Buddha used to obtain enlightenment. It was really about going in and unlocking one's own story from within, one's own strengths, if you will, one's own passions, and learning about healing, which is something I wasn't particularly aware of on a psychological level. And that was absolutely a game changer for me. And I just remember in the 2.5 years I was in psychotherapy, that my life from week to week to week, I could just feel myself just feeling better and stronger. I mean, I was even dressing better from one week to the next to the next. So there's these external pieces like, hey, those are nice pants. Yeah, it was a good session last week. Like, that's the level I'm on now. My pants are nicer. And I fell in love with it. And it clicked for me pretty soon after I started psychotherapy that this is what I wanted to do as far as my career. Before that, I had jobs, and that was the beginning of my career. So I went back to school, got my master's, sat for my exam, passed my first try, became a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California, and did that for about 5-ish years before I then transitioned into executive coaching. And so all of this time is about 7.5 years that I've been doing this work, and these very like sister or cousin type industries or practices have been focused on Black men in corporate America. As I shared earlier, I knew I wanted to work in the Black community and specifically with Black men, but I didn't know which demographic. Was it going to be guys who were teens or guys that are, fresh out of prison and have their own traumatic, response challenges from what goes on in there? I just didn't know. In my family, I guess if you will, blue collar, working class background, I didn't know about the corporate world, but I had a client that came in one day, and this brother was sharp, suited and booted. Harvard Business School grad, working at a nonprofit, was about to get married, and just had all these pieces that were very admirable to me, and yet was still going through life challenges, just the human condition. And I began working with him, and immediately I said, these are my guys. Like, this is my tribe. These are the people I want to not just be of service to, but actually learn from. And there's some things I think I know I need from this community that I didn't get growing up. So still part of my own healing and empowerment process. Grew that out, got what I needed as far as the healing, felt good, then became a leader in the space, learned a ton about corporate, started doing workshops at Google and Microsoft, NVIDIA, Capital One, and other organizations, and got to the point where today I work with guys one-on-one doing executive coaching. I don't do therapy anymore. And I also do speaking and writing and just having a good time with it.
And podcasts. Don't forget the podcasts.
Yeah, that's a new addition. This is awesome. If you can't tell already, I like to talk.
We promised the audience that we'd go on to imposter syndrome today. Imposter syndrome, how would you define that condition?
Yeah. So I would actually say it's related to an insecurity of being perceived as less than or lacking in some way. And I'm happy to use the business context. I believe that's where it was originally, I want to say discovered, if you will, but maybe diagnosed. And it's huge there as far as how people identify compared to a lot of other sectors in society. So some of the things I see in my guys is feeling like they don't belong, or they'll get found out for not being skilled enough in order to be where they're at, and they'll get demoted, or they'll get outcast, or they'll get fired from the company altogether. So it could probably be, although I don't think it technically is, put into more of an anxiety category of the internal experience connected to these thoughts around being an imposter in one's environment.
Yeah, I think it's the sort of thing that has been around forever, but we're perhaps more adept at identifying it, describing it, owning up to it, call it what you will. But I think it's something that's been around as people have become more senior or more responsibility. They found themselves asking themselves, why me? What sort of behaviors, what sort of challenges do you find your clients have when you've discovered it's an imposter syndrome situation?
Yeah, so the first thing is really overcompensating and showing up, trying to go over and above. Now, I don't mean just 110%, because they're confident in what they do and are confident in the outcomes that they can deliver. It's trying to protect themselves, and that's where it's coming from, in order to shore up any perceived deficiencies or weaknesses, or that they might get found out that they don't even feel like they belong there in that scenario. So that's one that can show up, is this overperformance element. which can at times work in their favor. And then there's the reverse of it. There is the kind of succumbing to it and being dominated by the experience internally and actually shying away. So even though a person has earned their slot, they've interviewed well and they've gotten the position or they've gotten the promotion, there could be a sense of withdrawing from their power, their potency, their leadership, making sure communication is happening consistently and clearly, and mistakes will start to show up. And psychologically, they're aligning with how they feel inside and where they believe they belong, which is at a lower level of seniority or possibly not in the organization at all if it's significant or severe for them. Yeah, that's a challenging one.
Yeah, I've seen exactly everything that you've described across my client base, and sometimes the overreactions are pretty extreme. They turn to micromanaging, the fear of failure. They become very poor at delegating and time management because they're trying to overachieve, and all the things that you just described. It can be hidden in that context that you're seeing other symptoms before you get them to recognize that it's actually, as you say, an anxiety complex, something around not feeling adequate. Do you think there are certain personalities or certain types of people that are more prone to this, or is it just everybody's at risk?
Yeah. So the clients that I've seen that struggle with this the most are already introverts. And when one is moving to more of a senior role, that whole piece around executive presence it's real. And being, needing to communicate in a certain way, possibly to larger audiences, they're now pedestaled a bit more in front of um, certain sectors of employees, employee resource groups, for example. Now they're being called out for all of these different leadership roles. It can turn that up for them more, and the politics intensify typically in senior leadership as well. So for those that have more of an internal place of comfort and recharging and living from that place, it can definitely be a bit more challenging for them, I've noticed, than some of my more extroverted clients that really live for the connection with others, being seen, being admired, being lauded publicly, things of that nature.
And when they come to you and you start these sessions, is it something that they've already recognized, or as I said earlier, is it something that's hidden? How does it normally show up for you?
Yeah. So they can very easily identify that they're having challenges in the workplace and name what those challenges are typically, and how there is a level of insecurity inside of them around certain social scenarios that it's called, or they would call it, or would be, could call it imposter syndrome. Very few, very few. These are still guys that have gone to some of the best schools in the world and have had, amazing training. So mentally, logically, they can see why they're there. Yet internally, they're having a contradictory experience of really asking themselves of, why them versus, one of their colleagues or a competitor going for that role. And they're struggling with that piece of the puzzle. I think one of the unique things, actually, I can't say it's necessarily unique, but just because this is the population I work with, specifically with Black men, but it could be unique um, to all populations across the board, is on that level of not wanting to show weakness. I could definitely say for Black men in a workplace that's very likely they're going to be the only Black man on that level of seniority. So, senior director, VP, SVP, C-suite, they're so used to closing up when it comes to their insecurities in order to form a protective barrier of not being perceived as weak or less than, and just forging ahead to the best of their abilities. It can be a challenge for them to have that introspective nature, which is where an executive coach or psychotherapist would come in and create that safe environment for them to let their guard down and know that if they open up, their whole world isn't going to just fall apart. They'll lose their job, lose their family, and be homeless. I mean, you can't imagine the number of times I hear guys that are bringing in, over 200, over 300,000 total comp, thinking, if we go here in this conversation and I become vulnerable, it's going to lead to being homeless on the street. So yeah, it's interesting where the conversations can go.
Yeah, it's definitely that piece of fear is what drives imposter syndrome, isn't it? You described it earlier as the fear of being found out or proving yourself to be inadequate. One of the surprising areas that I see it turn up is when someone says, "I'm having trouble with public speaking. I'm not good at talking to an audience," and that's about feeling that they're not really competent to be at the front of the room and talking about something that they probably are expert in reality, and certainly something that they probably know more about than anybody else in the room at the time. And yet they don't feel comfortable doing that at all. And it does when you explore that, certainly when I explore it with my coaches, it is about fear. It's about someone asking that one tricky question in the middle of a presentation they don't know the answer to, which is so unlikely it's untrue. And even if they did, you can handle it anyway by just saying, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. It doesn't make you an inadequate person. And it is unbalanced. The imposter syndrome symptoms that I see are, they suffer from unbalance. It's an extremity of some kind of problem, whether it's overwork, whether it's, as I mentioned earlier, micromanaging. It's an extreme reaction, albeit on a spectrum of extremities. When you're working with your clients on imposter syndrome, how do you help them unlock it and find solutions? What do you do with them?
Chomping at the bit to answer this one. And so I'm actually thinking of a specific client that I've been working with recently who just talked about communication, had some challenges in public speaking, and was definitely a part of his job. So interesting that he found himself there and yet was having this unique challenge with it. And his concern was how he was being perceived in his communication, and that it wasn't coming across clearly, or he wasn't delivering the content that was needed to be delivered so people would just understand what's going on. And we really worked on that and got down to the minutia of what is it specifically that you're concerned about in your communication style or content. And then we got down to just the very technical pieces around his communication style and recommended that he see a communication coach, which is something that he said he never even thought about that before. So some of the first places that I go are just concrete skills based results, because it may be causing some of that imposter syndrome or that anxiety that's heightening it for them. And so we actually help to resolve these concerns for my clients. And I notice that typically helps. They often think that this is just how it is. It can't change for me, or there isn't a solution. So that's the first thing we think through. Is there a solution that you could obtain? And then what would that look like? And for this particular client, he said, to get a communications coach, I would reach out to, my colleagues on LinkedIn or on certain Slack channel and start getting resources. I said, great, let's do that now. He says, now, yeah, it's a working session. Let's go for it. Are you comfortable with that? Yes. Boom. He reaches out by the end of the session. He's got references for communication coaches to help him gain mastery and, well, at the very least, get comfortable with this part of his life, professional life, as far as improving his speaking is concerned. So that's the first place that I typically go, is just to see if we could shore up any skill set deficits that they have that there might be some truth to, possibly, in that. As you said, that question, that stickler question that comes in the middle of the presentation, doing quite a bit of role playing as well of what are those questions? Let's go through your list, because there's probably something in your mind that you're concerned about being asked. So let's just free association, take a step back, see what comes to mind as far as those questions, and then let's go through answers that you'd feel confident delivering. And so again, that's more in the skill set based arena. And I found that to help a lot with my clients and being very proactive in places that they feel deficient or insecure. The other piece that I go, and it's really pulling from my psychotherapy roots, is we go to their childhood and find out, was there something in their childhood, developmental, related to their parents or other caretaker figures or even other kids around or cousins that may have cultivated this condition for them? And do we need to go through a healing and reparative process for them to get something that they missed in their just developmental cycle that we can deliver for them psychologically, emotionally? The, the image I like to use is of a gas tank being on full or medium or empty. And sometimes when we grow up, a tank can be on empty of certain things and impact us even as adults. So we got to find ways to fill that up or just go through healing processes. We cannot change the past, but we can definitely change one's relationship to it, which can definitely impact how they show up in the present. So psychological healing and growth is usually the second place I'll start doing my assessment on to see if there's room for improvements there.
It's interesting, this. I mean, one of the perspectives that I see from people is that if they're from a background, whether it's a social background or educational background that is not common amongst their peers, their new peers in their new role, that can start to undermine their confidence, create this anxiety. They don't understand why they're in this group, or they're not comfortable in this group. And so whilst that might only be a matter of time for them to get comfortable, they're not comfortable, and that starts to set off this imposter syndrome, and often that's a domino effect, as I mentioned earlier, into other symptoms. Another thing that I've found with imposter syndrome is that people who've been promoted very, very quickly, and they suddenly perhaps had 3-4 promotions in 3 or 4 years, they take breath and look around and think, gosh, I'm the youngest one of these, those, or something else on this level, or I'm, as you mentioned earlier, I'm the only one of this type here for whatever reason. Sure. And then suddenly they just have this lack of confidence, or this fear rise up in front of them. It's definitely what I've seen, and it does sort of chime with the things that you're talking about. Do you find that when you're working with your coachees on this subject, that it follows a pattern of time? Does it take typically 3 months? Does it take typically 6 months? Is there a process that you see unfolding, and it has a fairly well-worn path for you?
Yeah. So there's 3, 6, and a year. So 3 months, they're really gaining a greater awareness of the condition and the various ways that it shows up for them in the workplace. Typically in the early stages, it's more so focused on mindfulness, mindful awareness. So not the sitting meditation type of mindfulness, but the active mindfulness of they're walking through their day and they're starting to notice themselves behave in a certain way. They're gaining greater awareness of their own thoughts and how they're showing up in these social and professional settings, for them just to have more awareness of it. Once they have that, and I call that with my clients puzzle pieces. We're not taking action. We're not putting the puzzle together. We're just putting them on the table to see what might be a corner piece, what colors might be going together, or certain, designs might end up going together, taking a look at the box, getting a good idea for what might go where. That's usually the first pieces, that awareness. Sometimes with the awareness alone, because these are, more times than not, very high functioning, very intelligent people, and they can start putting the pieces together themselves on, oh, that's what I'm doing. That's how I'm behaving. That's how that's showing up. And they start to, from a place of creativity, explore, well, what's another way that I can go about approaching this that can give me a better result and internal experience inside? So that's usually roughly around the first 3 months. And then going into 3 months to 6 months, it's, I like to call it like a jackhammer. Like we're going to work. We are going to start digging into some of these behavioral shifts and mindset shifts that they can make that will be more empowering for them. And what I always tell them is, I'm not a doctor of like this is your cure. Take these 2 pills and this will solve it type of thing. It's more of an experimentation for each person because everybody's unique and different in their own ways of let's try this. Okay, we've identified a few behaviors and mindset shifts that seem like they will be very supportive for you based on the conversation had here today. Let's go ahead and have you utilize these in the next week, even if it's just one time, and measure the results. So we'll circle back next week. We're going to see if that works for you. If it does, my recommendation is to continue doing that going forward. And if not, we'll look for something different that works for you. So it's typically in that second 3 months where a lot of shifts happen. And then in the following 6 months, there's more of those shifts, but it's more about empowering them to internalize the process of identifying where something might be off and then identifying what those behavior mindset shifts could be for themselves and having them make those changes so they don't. I mean, yes, I'm in the business of working clients, but so they don't need me forever. They can actually internalize the process that I am coaching them through for themselves in an empowered state. They can move on. But of course, they can circle back to me anytime they need to.
One of the sort of watershed moments for me, often with clients, is when we talk about imposter syndrome, and you're not the first, you're not the only. There's many of us have been through what you're going through, possibly many of us who are still there. And this is a much more common phenomenon than you might believe. And your peer group might be suffering exactly what you're suffering right here, right now. I think the next stage for me often is trying to, as they progressed and started to become more confident and the anxiety as it were dissipated, bearing in mind they are normally, as you quite rightly say, very high functioning, very capable people, is that they don't suddenly lose this edge and become arrogant and overconfident and they become too complacent. Because the important piece in all of this is that by being aware of the fact that they're not infallible, keeps them on their toes, keeps them on the edge of their seat, keeps them at the top of their game, but it's got to be in balance. It can't be to the point where it paralyzes them in the work that they do. Mm-hmm. And when you're working with your typical client base, do you find that as you get towards the end of it, you start to see the same sort of things I was mentioning about arrogance or overconfidence or lack of perspective, or does that not happen for you?
Yeah, so typically toward the end of working with my clients that are experiencing imposter syndrome, it's actually more of a sense of comfort and peace in their authentic leadership voice. Something they've had possibly a bit of an estranged relationship from when they came to see me. So it's just a sense of resting in the value that they bring to a conversation or to an organization where, I mean, I heard that word balance, and that's usually where it ends up. Just a greater sense of self and how they fit into the greater equation in the workplace and where their contributions are. Usually, I'm getting the arrogance and those things on the front end of when they're coming in. And those are the kind of overcompensating behaviors and tactics that they fall back on to shore up that, this internal experience that they don't know how to address yet. Yeah.
Joel, we're coming to the end of this session, and I'm really grateful for you giving us your time today. We clearly can't cover everything of imposter syndrome in one setting, Well, how can any of our audiences find you? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. One of the best things about doing podcasts for me is learning. It's just awesome how much I get to learn from these conversations. So thank you for providing me with this opportunity as well. For the listeners out there, you're more than welcome to find me at blackexecutivemen.com. It's spelled exactly how it sounds, blackexecutivemen.com, and you can learn more about myself, my organization, see if you'd like a consultation and reach out that way. You're also welcome to find me on LinkedIn. I have a memorable name. There's not a bunch of guys on LinkedIn called Jewel Love. So you can definitely find me on there. Join the daily newsletter, start getting some success strategies that I put out on LinkedIn as well.
Jill, thank you very much for all of that. Thanks for joining us. That's it for this week, everybody. I hope you found that enjoyable. I hope you found it useful, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. So there you have it. That was the latest edition of the Coaching Conversation. Hope it was useful. Hope it did what it was meant to do for you. If you want any more information about our coaching practice, it's at the executivemindset.co.uk. While you're there, you can book your own free session, which will give you a much deeper insight to what coaching can really do for you. If you enjoyed the session, please give us a good rating. And if you want to reach out for further information, do email me at theexecutivemindset@sagegreen.com. That's about it for this time, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.